So it's been a tough week, been very sick, but continuing in our series where we have been focusing on what you might call the supporting cast of the story of Jesus' birth. We have now a story of the King of the Jews and the Shepherd of the field. That in Matthew chapter 2, it says this: Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king had heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. So, as we're meeting this man, we can see that he's in charge. He's large and in charge. He's the guy on top. That when visitors from a foreign land, which we're going to talk about more at a later date, come in, they immediately come to him first, assuming that if there's been a new king born in the region of Judea, that obviously it's going to be in his home. And he comes in, and in fact, historically, one of the things we know about Herod is that he referred to himself with this term, King of the Jews. He uses it for him here, right? So if you were to knock on his door and ask him, where's the King of the Jews? He's going to say, I'm right here. And he was notoriously fragile in his ego regarding his hold or his security of his throne, that he put multiple members of his family, including even his most favorite wife, to death in order to try and make sure that his grasp was solid on his rule as the patriarch or the monarch of Judea. He took it very seriously, which is why it says that the entire city of Jerusalem was troubled. They knew that he had bloody hands already, just from imagined threats of succession or rebellion from people in his family. Imagine if someone else was accused of actually being the newly born king. How is the rest? What if anyone was found out to be an ally of that supposed newborn king? How much danger they would be in. So all of Jerusalem was troubled as a result of this news, which also means that all of the rest of Jerusalem would have known about it. That we have the most enfranchised, central in our society here, of the ancient first century Israel are there. You have the king, you have the capital city of Judea, or of Israel, and you have, it says that he summons the chief priests and the scribes of the people, and he inquired of them where this Christ was to be born. Meaning that you have now the religious elite that are drawn in the story, and none of them knew anything about Jesus' birth. Or at least they hadn't received the headline per se. They were completely ignorant of the statement of fact that it had happened. They had to be told by an outsider. In contrast to that, in Luke chapter 2, you have the very opposite occurring. That it says in verse 8, And in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with fear. And the angel said to them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news, great joy, that will be for all of the people. For unto you is born in this day, in the city of David, a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You will find the baby wrapped in swaddling cloths, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was a great multitude of angels with the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace amongst those with whom he is pleased. The shepherd was the most outside of society that you could get, with the possible exception of a prostitute or a Roman in that day and age. And in fact, being a shepherd, because of its outside kind of fringe level on society, was a harbinger or something like a harbor for people on the run from society. If you think Moses, he murders the Egyptian and then he runs off into the wilderness of Midian, where he becomes a shepherd. That it's a way that, because it's out there, you're obviously caring for animals that eat grass. Grass needs to grow out in spaces where grass can grow. So you're out there in the middle of nowhere most of the time without supervision. So I mean, if you need to hide from the authorities, maybe you need to cool your heels, Wild West romanticism, if you want to insert that there, there's room for it. If you're a murderer, maybe, some other form of criminal, it's also that they were treated in society as if they were like highwaymen, bandits, robbers, so they would be avoided anyways. And so if that was you, it was an easy way to hide out. And these specific set of shepherds would have been the ones that were responsible for caring for, raising the sacrificial lambs, the ones that were necessary, that had to be blemishless or unblemished or absolutely flawless, in order to be offered in exchange for the sins of the people of Israel. But because of their reputation, they weren't allowed into the temple. The animals that they were caring for were the token, per se, of God's redemption, a redemption that they themselves could have no part of. And that, I mean, they were not allowed to testify in court. They weren't allowed to make formal charges or complaints against other members or people in society. They couldn't do anything. We don't even have a category of person that parallels this. But that you could maybe say like immigrants, or maybe sex workers, or like there's different, but we don't have one, because there isn't a category of people that's quite like this in our society. But it's also notable that anytime a subculture is created by the mainline culture, push someone off to the fringe, they begin to bond really tightly together, right? As a compensation for their ostracization. That you see this with the LGBT, we see this kind of thing with the feminists, we see this with any kind of immigrant culture. One of the reasons why in New York City that the city's kind of a patchwork of different enclaves is people would come from a foreign nation and then they would live together tightly in a specific region of that city, and they would create Chinatown or Little India or Little Italy or Germantown and these types of things. And then you can see remarkable distinctions in the architecture and the way the roads are mapped and the way that people speak in those areas, and that there's actual dialects living in New York City that the home nation that it came from doesn't speak it anymore. That we could imagine that these shepherds would have been like that too. A lot of the shepherds would have been family units as well. Like that's important to note. But I mean, they would have been rough, but they would have cared about each other intimately. because they needed to. They needed to be able to trust and rely on one another to get through each night as it progressed throughout the year. And so, I mean, they of course would have known how to fight and how to spit, how to cuss, but they also would have known how to tell a good story around a campfire and do the same things that we tend to do, telling ghost stories and the like that. So, in the middle of that scene, these outsiders ostracized from society, the glory of God shines around them, and the news of a newborn King of the Jews is announced. Whereas, as we just saw, Herod, chief priests, scribes, the citizens of Jerusalem, completely ignorant and uninvolved, completely bypassed to see the lowest of the low instead finding out. The major thing to really take away from this is that the gospel, the story of Christ, is more than anything, it's for an outcast. That it's not for people that think they're on the inside. In fact, Jesus himself teaches us that he didn't come for those who think that they're saved, but those who know that they are lost. That that a hospital isn't needed for the healthy, but that a doctor is needed for the sick. That in the same that these shepherds are brought into a story that, quite frankly, they have no business being in. And that Jesus would go further to bring them into the story and bring them into the center of society, saying that he is the good shepherd. That, as mentioned before, that many of the people, as they were hearing that, would have considered that to be a contrasting in terms, an oxymoron, jumbo shrimp type thing. Yet these are the ones who hear about it first. And that, what is their immediate response? It says, when the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let's go to Bethlehem and let's see this great sight which the Lord has made known to us. Their immediate response is to investigate further. And their investigation takes them to where Mary and Joseph were. It's exactly as they had been made known to them. Verse 17 says, and when they saw it, they made known the sayings that had been told them concerning the child. They're starting to tell everyone. They immediately are converted into the first missionaries, the first evangelists of the New Testament. That they immediately begin to tell the story that they've been told. And I think that we need to respond in the same way. That we, being outcasts in our sin, have been brought in and brought near. You need to respond to that with ever-increasing investigation. Learn more. And you don't have to be a scholar in order to be a Christian, but it does help to learn some things about the archaeology and the sociology of the faith that has shaped the Western world, if you wish to adopt it. But it's also notable that even if you do become a scholar, degrees more than Fahrenheit, but if you're not still at your most basic an evangelist, you've missed it. You've missed the very point of the story being shared with you, so that you could share it with others. That's the point. That do not overlook outcast peoples, but also don't neglect them either. And so The challenge from this comes from, on the one hand, are you cheating yourself out of the story of the gospel? Because you think that it's for someone else. It's not for me. Because that's what the devil does. On the one hand, he says it's not true. And on the other hand, he's going to attack you by saying it's not for you. So have you been trying to cheat yourself out of the gospel, saying that it's for other people? It might have worked for others, but it's not working for you. The second thing is, what other groups or individuals are you considering to be beyond its reach, outside its reach, because they aren't pretty enough, they aren't cool enough, they may have developmental issues, who knows what the criteria is, they have a sexual past that you disagree with, whatever the issue is. How often are we cutting people off from the gospel because we just choose not to share it with them? That either we think they're unworthy of it, undeserving, or unhearing of it, that they wouldn't listen anyway. Because you can be shocked sometimes that the fact that Paul was originally a persecutor and that Peter denied Christ 3 times in one night. No one is beyond its reach. So that's the challenge for you. It's for you. And it's for you to share with even those who you don't necessarily think it's for.